Totul me I was scared.
This society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me.
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Das was just scheduled to so went to the garage. I've got an ex.
Shh. I closed my eyes. I was crying so hard. And all of a sudden he was there.
It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Dead won't bother you. It's the living you're gonna worry about.
People are murdered every day. Profiler Africa is where we break down the psychology and science of violent crime. Tonight we're stepping into the high-stakes world of crisis response, a field where every decision can mean the difference between life and death. Our guest is Vincent Swardt, a seasoned crisis response consultant with decades of experience in investigative risk and security consulting and nearly a decade working on frontline kidnap-for-ransom cases. He's responded to incidents across Africa, including the DRC, Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. Vincent is a senior response consultant for the Unity Advisory Group and the managing director and co-owner of Saraban Solutions. He's also a criminologist with a background in psychology and a member of multiple international threat assessment and security associations. And we have the pleasure of his company tonight. And we also have the pleasure of Gerard Labuschagne's company. He is, of course, South Africa's leading forensic psychologist, former head of SAP's investigative psychology unit, and our co-host here at Profiler Africa. Good evening, Gerard. And once again, folks, if you're tuning in, we are not live tonight. This is a pre-record. So I believe the sun's just come up for you that side, Gerard. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's as I said last time, I think it's slowly turning into winter. So we're just like grabbing onto the last few bits of summer to enjoy it before the long, cold, gray, rainy weather here in Vancouver.
I think we should jump straight into it tonight, Gerard. Before we introduce, or before we meet Vincent, perhaps you just want to set a little bit of context and set this, set the playing field for us.
Yeah, so thanks. I thought this is a topic that I find personally fascinating. When I was in SAPS, I think back in 2007, I was trained on the SAPS hostage negotiation or Negotiators course, which is a 3-week-long course. Literally, it's for 3 weeks. You're there busy from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. Weekends, you have scenarios of kidnappings and, negotiations, etc. So, and I was always very impressed by the course that SAPS did. It really shaped how we brought a lot of the things I learned from that course into our own investigative psychology course. How to do certain scenarios, etc. So it's a really very well presented course. I think SAPS has had Negotiators since the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken. And in SAPS, it's a voluntary thing. So you'll have your normal job as a cop. You get selected to be a negotiator. You go on the training, and then you do this basically after hours or fitted into your normal day-to-day job. I think you get like $400 a month extra for doing this. And when there is a case, whether it's someone wants to jump off of a bridge or a kidnapping, that becomes your primary function and your primary responsibility. And we've seen a big increase in South Africa of kidnapping for ransom for these high values. Since I would say 2016, it was that Omar Karim was one of the first big ones we had. He was 2016. It was widely publicized. And he was kept for months, 4 months, I think. And that was the longest we'd had at that point in time of a local guy in South Africa being kidnapped. And, the ransoms in those cases are millions. And we kind of suspected it was syndicates operating in Mozambique and other parts of Africa, feeling that South Africa is ready to do it. I think the technology there is so easy nowadays for these guys to do these things without being caught. The methods of payment, which is usually the weak spot for most people, is much easier nowadays to shift money around, and Bitcoin and other methods that I think it's just made it easier. So we've started to see a lot more of these people being kept for 4 or 5 months, large amounts of money, the Muslim community was specifically targeted a couple of years ago. And you get smaller ones, you can get like quick ones where somebody's kidnapped for what they have in their ATM card and kept until it's 12 o'clock at night and then draw some more money and release them. And then the other side of it is you get these very well-planned, structured, organized crime like kidnappings of people where they know what they're doing. They're not going to get caught. And in those high-value cases, you often just don't see arrests. You see arrests in the less professional cases, etc. So it's fascinating for me. I continue to do some of these cases after I left SAPS. I have a love-hate relationship with them because they're always fascinating. They're always great to help someone to get it done, but they are incredibly stressful and you have to drop everything. So So as I thought it would be great to bring Vincent on because I know he's done a lot of this and we've worked on a few cases together.
Pertinent to be talking about as well. I mean, I'm just curious to know because, living in a city like Johannesburg, you kind of hear just in passing that these types of things are happening more and more regularly and that these criminal syndicates are becoming more and more entrenched. So it'll be nice to get a sense of, some of the reality of that. All right. Shall we say good evening to Vincent then?
I think we should.
Good evening, Vincent. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks so much for joining. I mean, it's as I said when I thought about who I can get to talk about this, you're definitely one of the people that sprung to mind. Obviously, as I said, we've done 1 or 2 cases with each other, which we might touch on a bit later. And you're one of the few people I know who do this as it's a regular service that you offer, that you're on standby. We're going to get into the how you got into it and who you work for now. And also, I mean, as I said, these are the kind of cases that you only work with people that you trust and that are competent, because in these things you can't afford to screw up. So I definitely thought, there's only like 2 or 3 people in the country who I would have even asked to do this, and you're definitely one of them. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, I mean, I think I was thinking back, we discussed this quickly when we first met, and again, both of our memories are foggy, but it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago. It was most likely through a mutual friend, one of 2 people in the professional industry of the security world. And I know you spoke at the African Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. I think it was on one of our webinars, if I'm not mistaken. So and then after that, as I said, we got into doing some work together. But this is never a profession that anybody thinks of necessarily getting into. People watch movies and think, "Oh, that looks cool," but you don't go study at school at university to do this. How did you get into the world of kidnap-for-ransom negotiation?
Yeah, I mean, it was almost by chance. Really, I sort of as a young adult read I think I've told the story to you. I read a couple of Mickey's books. Were fascinated and thought that was what I was going to do. I think the unit that you then took over as the behavioral sciences unit was still called the psychology unit at that stage, or the investigative psychology unit. And so went to varsity, did a bachelor's degree majoring in psychology and criminology, and then did the postgrad or the honors in criminology. And I remember phoning you up sort of in the middle of that postgrad and being disappointed to sort of realize at that stage that all the members then were clinical psychologists, I think barring one. So I think that sort of put an end to that dream. And then, I mean, I was fortunate enough to get involved and to join and the company that I now own. I joined them straight after varsity, and their clientele is corporate, mining, FMCG, and we're an investigative risk and security consulting. So I sort of gained exposure and experience in investigative work, security. I mean, so from the investigation side, got a bit of work, got a bit of exposure abroad, did a human rights abuse investigation in Zambia, remote Zambia at one stage, traveled to Tanzania a couple of times on I remember doing a sexual abuse case there, an unlawful detention case, and then obviously locally, working on sort of disciplinary industrial action, executive close protection tasks and those kind of things. And that really set me up in 2016, when I took over the business, we at that stage had done work for one of the large global risk agencies. And Chuck Regini, he headed up a kidnap desk for them. But at that stage, when I took over the company, it moved over to Unity Advisory Group. It was Unity Resources Group at that time. And Chuck, bless him, he's an amazing guy. He's one of the best out there. He led the FBI's team of international hostage negotiators. He was influential in drafting foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy on kidnaps abroad. He worked some of the biggest cases. I mean, you would know the Burnham case. He worked that with Chris Voss, who you'd also know. He worked I think he worked on the Jim Foley case. He worked Jessica Buchanan. I mean, he's one of the best guys out there. So he rang me up and he said, "Listen, Vince, we've done a couple of stuff together. Would you be interested in doing kidnap work?" And obviously, crisis response work. And, crisis response work includes, evacuations. It includes missing persons. It includes extortion work. So there's transferable skills, investigative experience into missing persons, security consulting into evacuations. But obviously kidnap work was very different. It's very unique. So we did an interview, or we met and we did an interview, and for Chuck to really assess whether this was something that he believed I could do. And I was fortunate enough to join the Unity team at that stage, and did training under Chuck's mentorship directly with Unity. And 6 months later, I was in the DRC doing my first case.
Sure. Again, it's always interesting how one's pathways twists and winds, and when you're at the right place at the right time, you meet the right people. And it's just, this is always how these things seem to work. So what was it? Your first case, I know we got a few pictures from that. What was that like?
Yeah, so that first case was a baptism of fire. I deployed out to Rwanda, and then from Rwanda into the DRC, and then choppered into site. And the case was a remote mining compound, so a residential compound, was attacked by rebel insurgents. They kidnapped some foreign nationals, including a French national, some Tanzanians, and some locals. And so we choppered in, and this mining compound, this residential compound, is in the middle of thick jungle, right in the middle of remote DRC. There's some communities around, but in these cases, and particularly in this case, it was an extremely challenging case. The demands in that case were not just substantive. They weren't only ransom demands. This group wanted mining concessions. They wanted concessions in terms of community upliftment, etc., etc. So it was a challenging negotiation, and these guys had the support of the community. So we sort of chop it into a fairly hostile environment, and from the onset, this was a pretty challenging case. But an adventure in itself, and an incredible experience. It was also the longest case I did. So the first case I did was the longest one I did. It lasted around 3 months, just over 3 months, that particular case. So the way we work is generally we'd have a consultant that would deploy to corporate headquarters in a case like that, and they would then form part of the crisis management team, and we would have consultants that would fly into incident location, and they would form part of the incident management team. And these are really the guys on the operational, on the ground, and the guys at corporate HQ would be the decision makers, sort of feeding from the advice and the operational aspects. So I was on the ground. I fortunately enough, there was a French consultant, David. He deployed with me, and a brilliant guy, such a great mentor on that case too. And we remained friends, and he's a guy. So but yeah, extremely challenging on so many fronts and so many elements, and yeah, but a really good experience.
I do have some images to show, but I wanted to ask, in a case like this, often I find with any kind of case that it's those early periods that are so critical. How you get set up that first, in a typical crime, that first 48 hours is critical. What are the important things to establish early on, and how important are the kind of early phases in a case like this?
I mean, that's a great question. Again, going back to that case, it was a complex one because they were the security company had an insurance policy, and the mining company had an insurance policy, and they were different policies with different service providers, and the different service providers had different response elements attached to them. So we essentially two sets of response elements deployed into country, and by the time we arrived on site, we deployed for the mine employees. By the time we arrived on site, there was already a ransom payment and a double dip made. So that made it, that puts you on the back foot as you arrive in country, because they've already made concessions, they've paid money, and obviously there were no hostages released. So you're absolutely right. In a kidnap and in a hostage case, that first contact and how we behave during that initial call is really sets you up for how that negotiation is going to go. And in this particular case, it was quite challenging because there were two sets of respondents, and that created some challenges. But I mean, we sorted that out, and in the end, we worked really well together.
Yeah. Perhaps as a jump in, people don't necessarily know that. I mean, you actually, when you say, there were two, each had a policy. I mean, people often don't know that you actually can get kidnap-for-ransom insurance policies. We just want to quickly explain what those are and what do they typically give a person in these situations.
Yep. Yeah. So generally, those are called special risks insurance. I don't get involved in the underwriting or the wording around that. So forgive me if I do make mistakes in that. But they would typically cover crises such as kidnaps, missing persons, abductions, evacuations, and those kind of events. And they could be either corporate policies, or families could take out these policies. Most of the big insurers these days have a special risks insurance policies. It's a growing market in South Africa, and each of these insurers then have specialist response elements that are attached to their policies. In Unity's case, we have 12 consultants globally placed. So we have myself in Africa, we've got David in France, we've got guys in South America, in the UK, across Europe, to ensure that our guys are able to deploy and get it to incident location as quickly as possible and start advising. Yeah, that's it's an absolutely growing market. I think, in South Africa, we're seeing growth there too, but it's been around for quite some time.
And so that will typically, and again, I'm saying typically, give you someone who's going to advise on how to manage the case. Do they typically also cover the money that's being demanded, or is that not really what those things are aimed at?
Yeah. No. So most of these policies are reimbursable. So they cover the response. So I think the most important element there is the response consultant. The fact that those policies attach that person, that family, that organization to expertise and experienced individuals who are going to guide them and help them through this crisis. So that, to me, is the most important thing. But absolutely, so most of these policies cover ransom payments if ransom agreements are, if resolutions are reached, they reimburse it. So the policyholder would typically have to pay the ransom amount, and then they would be reimbursed in cases where policies do cover ransom payments. Yeah.
And we'll get into dodgy people who offer to do this work and stuff perhaps a bit later, because that's a big whole issue on its own. If we jump back to the Zambia case, to the DRC case, so that's how you got involved. There was a policy for one of these companies. You were then instructed by the insurer to get involved and provide your assistance. I know we got some pics.
Can I put up the pics? Can I put up the pics here?
Yeah.
Here we go. Yeah. Talk us through
This is the
these.
backstory that people often don't get exposed to.
Yeah. So this one sort of this one doesn't do it justice. The pictures don't do it justice. It is absolute thick jungle around this mining compound. And I think if we go around, so right from the onset, one of the sort of realizations were that there was going to be quite a security risk or a safety risk in terms of this deployment. And I don't want to sort of jump ahead, but at one stage, I think there were many challenges, and we can talk around some of the challenges that we experienced in this case. This is David, by the way, in that photo. But one of the sort of major events in that deployment was, I think probably about 5 weeks into this kidnap, we received intel reports. So after the attack and the abduction, the Congolese military deployed some resources out to the compound. There were law enforcement, so some of the police resources, tactical units, they were brought through to bring some assistance and security elements. And around 5 weeks in, we started receiving some reports that there was an imminent attack, or there was an attack planned by the same group of insurgents or these rebels that had taken these people hostage. And at that stage, they deployed, I think, 50 additional soldiers. They had some soldiers set up in what they call the hotels in one of the local villages about 5 kilometers out. And I think it was a Friday. That Friday, we were sitting outside our little house on the compound, and an intelligence report came through, and it said there was going to be an attack by this group that evening. And with a French hostage or a French national being taken, at that stage there were 2 French diplomats on the compound as well, sort of overseeing matters, from a diplomatic perspective, which obviously raised the risk in terms of site security and safety as well. And yeah, I mean, I remember, you then, Cooper's code, go switch over to condition orange, and now you've got an active threat that you're sort of focusing on. And I slept in my kit that night and had my go bag ready. And 4 o'clock that next morning, I just remember sort of in a haze, woke up, and there was a firefight on the go. And I remember David coming into my room, and he was in his jocks. I mean, we'd received this intelligence report the day before, and he still went to bed without clothes.
His underwear.
It was silly. And his condition orange was much different to mine. But I mean, he was out, and he was kitted, and we were sort of set up for the rest of that morning. And at about 7 o'clock, I think, sort of the firefight that dissipated. They were sort of pushed off the soldiers that managed to push off most of the insurgents. Yeah, I mean, it was surreal. There were some casualties. That next morning, there were immediate evacuations. I remember us getting onto the bus. All the expats were then ordered to evacuate the site. There's about a 5-kilometer travel out to the airstrip, and we were on the bus out to the airstrip, and we just got the message at the pilot. It said, "Listen, it's too hot. He's literally touching down. He'll pick up the severely injured, and then he's out of there." So we made the trip out to the airstrip, made the trip back to the compound, and I'll never forget sitting in the we called it the guest house, but it was a sort of brick building where we slept, and then putting coffins together just outside our window for the guys that rest their souls that had for the casualties. So yeah, it was pretty surreal. It was for a first case. Out in the DRC, it was absolutely surreal, but it was an incredible experience.
How
you've got you've got the pressure of these cases in general, which even if you're doing these cases in Johannesburg in the luxury environment, the pressure back and the pressure from the families and etc. I mean, now you throw in a war zone, I can't even imagine. But just quickly, in this, was it one person that had been kidnapped, and were they in an unknown location, or was it more like they had a bunch of hostage, we knew where they were, but there was just a negotiation? What was just the quick setting around the case?
Yeah, so no, as I said, there was a French mine employee and I think 2 Tanzanians kidnapped, and just on this photo. So I mean, this gives you an idea. This was the back perimeter fence of the compound, and it's fairly soft. And you've got a single chap sitting there, and that was kind of when we arrived. This was our concern, being sort of right in the middle of nowhere, thick sort of jungle around us, and really soft security. But no, we had the group, if I recall correctly, there were about potentially 7 or so hostages taken, and the difference between rural cases like these and urban cases like the ones we see, in South Africa or in urban settings in all across the globe is that. In this case, for example, it was a rebel insurgency group. They had a stronghold in that region, in that area. So there's really no security threat for them, which also means that they have the ability to keep hostages for much longer. They have established infrastructure. I mean, in this case, they had a compound set up where they had a prison facility. And one of our guys that were taken was quite sick, and they took him to a doctor. They had proper medical care, and they had the training facilities. So they in urban cases or in rural cases like these, it's often these are the cases that do tend to drag out because these guys do have the infrastructure, they have the ability. There isn't that kind of pressure, from a security perspective, than what would be in an urban case where you've got someone holed up in a house or in a shack, but there's every opportunity for someone to hear something or see something or whatever the case may be.
And were they particularly well looked after? I mean, I know you mentioned the one guy went to a doctor, but in general, they weren't assaulted. I mean, the fear is people are being assaulted when this is happening and tortured. I mean, is that, in your experience in general, besides this case, are they relatively okay looked after?
Yeah. I mean, in this case, they were really well looked after. I mean, rural DRC, so fresh water is always going to be a problem. They were given bottled water. They were given two meals a day. They weren't receiving beatings in this particular case. They were fairly, their feet were swollen up because they were walking them around in circles for quite large parts of the day. But I mean, that really differs. It differs from case to case. It differs from group to group. I remember working a case in Nigeria a couple of years ago where the hostage out that way, he was bound to a tree. There were two of them, and he was bound to a tree. They did mock executions in that case, received severe beatings. Were left to urinate and defecate in his clothes where he was. So absolutely, I mean it really differs, and particularly your more organized groups, have the means. They understand the process. They understand the reputational harm, or risk in terms of killing victims, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it really depends on the type of group.
What are some of the pros and cons of dealing with whatever local law enforcement is there, and also in dealing with the local communities, that kind of around the incidents itself?
So, I mean, law enforcement is a really sensitive one, right? Because particularly when you think of South Africa, and I mean, most of the time when I arrive, law enforcement have been notified because there's been an abduction outside a house or at a business premises or whatever it is, and it's it's in public. So someone's called the police have responded, and there's a docket open. So but it's a challenging one. It's a sensitive one. We certainly don't won't exclude or operate in conflict with law enforcement, but you often find the families are not keen to involve law enforcement. In South Africa, for example, it's corruption within law enforcement agencies is very well documented. I worked a case earlier in the year in the Eastern Cape where the hostage takers clearly knew, they had links within agencies and clearly knew that the numbers were being run through the local systems, et cetera, and made it quite known to the family during the negotiation, during the communication. So it's often the case where families don't feel comfortable involving law enforcement, and our advice on resolution strategies is never a tactical one, a rescue. It'll always be a negotiated resolution, and if the negotiation strategy is well well formulated, your chances of success is really good. So it's a difficult one. I mean, similarly in quite a few of the recent cases I've done, the agencies, for us, the only objective is the safe and the timeliest release of that hostage. That's what we're there to do. My job is not to catch bad guys. I'm not there to locate them and catch them. Our objective is to get that hostage back safely, and then obviously secondary to do it in such a manner that we don't place that hostage, that family, and that community at further risk, of future kidnapping. So doing it in a responsible way. But it's certainly not to catch these guys. And that's sort of, where there are sometimes, conflicting sort of objectives. We have agencies, wanting to mark ransom money, or follow money drops and that kind of stuff, and it's often quite dangerous and risky, and the families aren't often too keen on that. So yeah, that's a sensitive one, but that's something we get to deal with in every case.
And I mean, I know that our biggest frustration when dealing with families, is that they think the solution to this is going to be, we're going to track down the bad guys, and the cops or private investigators are going to kick down the door, grab the victim, and that's how it's going to be resolved. But in reality, real proper kidnappings for ransoms, it's probably almost always going to be through a negotiation that you get the person back, especially if they're very professional groups of people. They're not stupid. They're making far more money than the cops are. They invest in the technology and the expertise. They have people who are trained as negotiators who are on their side, help understand how these things work. And often, unfortunately, the families tend to they don't want to listen to you when you say, we need to do this from the start properly from a negotiation point of view. They're like, yeah. And they're being promised things by private investigators very often who promise them the world, And unfortunately, that's when these, like we mentioned right at the beginning, it's badly managed in the beginning. And eventually when they realize after a week or two, oh shit, we are nowhere nearer to locating this person and retrieving him tactically. Now we have to sort of focus on the talking part, and they haven't dealt with that properly. And they're advised by the private investigators on how to negotiate, which is the worst. Very often, not trained in this. You don't want to dabble in the field. And I just know that's what we've experienced. And to get them to take it seriously is often, unfortunately, they have to burn their fingers despite what you've been telling them. And before you can really sometimes get to do your job. And I mean, the case we've had before where, the family was just not being honest with us. They would give us some messages and then not give us some messages and not let us know. But we could tell, looks like there's been some discussion about money. And then they come out, okay, yes, this is what happening. This is why we didn't tell you. We promised we're going to be honest with you from now on. And then we find out 3 days later that, again, they weren't being honest. They were withholding things from us, just from our own, not even reputation point of view, but liability is like, we can't, if you don't trust us, then why do you have us here? And we can't work like this because, we can't negotiate if we don't know what half the communications are being given to us. And you and I just decided that we have to withdraw. And luckily the guy was released, but it's just, it's difficult.
Before we get into more depth into specific incidents, could you just paint a picture, especially from a southern kind of South African, sub-Saharan African point of view, how the prevalence of this issue and kind of the evolution of it over the last 10 to 15 years? Is this sense that kidnap-for-ransoms, for example, is a worsening problem in South Africa? Is that correct from your point of view? Just paint a kind of, how do you see the bigger picture?
Yeah. I mean, in the last decade, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I recently did a presentation on this, and it's astronomical, the growth in terms of numbers of kidnaps. What I will say to that is that probably 95% of those are short duration kidnaps. So typically these express kidnaps, that would last a couple of hours or a couple of days. And when we talk about long duration kidnap for ransom events, they probably make up about 5% of the cases in South Africa. But when we consider the numbers, there's been an incredible growth and increase in cases in the last decade, for sure. I mean, Gauteng is by far the epicenter of kidnaps in South Africa. I think somewhere around 50% of kidnaps are happening in Gauteng. And then Durban, followed by Durban, and then the Eastern Cape in Cape Town and Limpopo. But I'll tell you, the Eastern Cape, I mean, I've worked there quite a bit in the last couple of years, done quite a few cases there, and it's a problem. It's a growing problem out that side. But there's an absolute increase. I don't know if you've got numbers, Gerard.
Look, this is one thing people have to understand. When you look at the SAPS crime stats and you see the crime kidnapping, and it's got like 5,000 or 2,000, you just have to understand that the definition of kidnapping in South Africa is literally depriving someone of the freedom of movement. So I could lock you in your own bedroom and refuse to let you out. That's technically kidnapping. If I lure a victim on the streets and, hey, I've got a job offer for you, and I lure you into the veld, and you're going with me because you think I have a job offer, and I then rape you, that's kidnapping and rape. So you can't look at the crime stats because those are not all kidnapping for ransom. So ransom is, of course, or extortion is when you're now demanding something for the release of the person. So the crime stats just don't reflect the kidnapping for ransom stuff. And crime stats are never going to be accurate because, like you said, a lot of the stuff isn't reported because families don't want to report it for various reasons. But definitely, I would say, if I look at other people I know in the industry in South Africa, it's more, and it's definitely where we used to every now and then have a kidnap for ransom proper, like what we're talking about now. From 2016, it's unfortunately a fairly regular occurrence. Wow. And then, like my experiences, there were these professional groups that really moved in, and started doing this and had the setup, and they're sitting, the organizers sitting in Pakistan, the money's going to Dubai, very organized groups. And then I think my impression of what happened is guys locally started to think either it's guys who are locally involved on behalf of these groups playing one of these various roles, realized we're doing all the hard work, but we're getting paid peanuts. We can do this ourselves, but they didn't necessarily have the technological side of it for the money transfer. So we went back to seeing physical drop-offs of money. Yeah, and I think it's just guys who realized, I can do this. If we're doing the hard work, we can just do this on our own. We'll cut out the big bosses. Or people who were doing cash and transit robberies and ATM bombings and realized, oh my goodness, this is a lot less risky because we can plan the kidnapping whenever we want to. We have everything set up and we get paid as a ton of money, a few million, for babysitting someone. Hey, let's do this. And then it's everything in between, like I said earlier, from the ATM, grabbing a guy for his money in his car, in his ATM card, and quickly releasing him soon thereafter. But it is good money if you do this properly. I mean, that's one case I worked on, which was a 5-month-long kidnapping. I mean, eventually they got, I think it was 40 million. So these guys are, the professionals are making an absolute bloody fortune. And they're not doing this once. They've got multiple cases that are in various phases and rolling along. It's a massive industry for proper professionals.
I have two questions, but first question is there a particular MO that's kind of commonplace that kind of would help just to inform people of some of the kind of initial risk factors, some of the things to look out for, some of the things to, I don't know. So is there a particular MO? And do there tend to be trends in this and how the kidnapping would be actually enacted, like particular schemes, evolving plots that, they would use? Like, you hear about different ways that they'll hijack you, for example, living in Joburg. They lie in the road and jump up, and then the next month they break in the robots and so can you just unpack with what the kind of some of the things that people should be aware of are from an MO point of view?
Yeah, I mean, one thing you need to know is a kidnap for ransom case is never a random, unplanned event. So your express kidnaps may be opportunistic. So those ones, like Gerard said, you might have an ad, or someone might respond to a job ad, and and that person arrives, or you get in a e-hailing vehicle and you get driven around, or whatever the case is, and there's not necessarily victim targeting in that case. But a kidnap for ransom case is very seldom a random event where there isn't really well planned, where there isn't a form of victim targeting, reconnaissance, surveillance conducted. They understand who you are. They probably understand how much you're worth. They do enough research. A recent case we did, the abductors told our victims about family that live in other provinces, about family members that are divorced, about so very often they have people fairly close to you that they've gone to infiltrate. So it's never a random event, a kidnap for ransom. We're talking about kidnap for ransom, yeah. And if we talk about avoidance, the first thing is overt displays of wealth, right? Is creating that public perception that you've got a lot of money. It's not always possible because companies publish their executives the details and whatnot, so it's not always possible. But that's the background. That's where these guys pick it up. They see a victim, they know who that victim is, they do research, they understand, they have a good understanding of how much money they're going to fetch for this person.
Okay.
And I think what I've seen is that it's very often, this is why I think a lot of the in the Muslim community, it's a lot of people that have big cash businesses, and the perception, maybe rightly or wrongly so, that they have money that is easily available. But also with a family business, you're going to really struggle to get ABSA to pay out a 40 million rand ransom on an exec, because they're just going to say, no, we're not going to do that. That's not how we operate. But now you have a family business. So someone who owns a big cash and carry in Tembisa, it's a massive warehouse. It's like a mini macro, a lot of money moving through that. That's a much bigger risk from a point of view, because the people think you can easily get this money out, available, you can realize. I mean, when I worked on this one family, we said, how quickly can you get 20 million cash? And they said, well, give me an hour. Yeah. And it was there in cash, in boxes. So that makes you a big risk, because the fact you have money, and you 100%, they know they're not going to put this whole system in place and think, well, let's just grab a guy who's driving around in a Mercedes and hope he has 20 million. They know exactly what you can pay. So pleading poverty is often like not really helpful, because they know what's in your bank account. They know your financial status. So that puts you at a big risk. And a lot of those guys just don't have security. Well, they have like their unemployed friend's son who's their security, which is like, no, don't do that. So the guys who have close protection tend not to be taken, and it's typically to and from work, because they just know the routine, and they know the safest place where it is to grab you, and they've set this up for months before they've even decided.
So it's that idea of kind of a van pulls up, you get bundled into the back of the van kind of thing, I mean, to simplify it, that's essentially.
Yeah. I mean, Joe, to touch on your point about the Muslim community being targeted, and a couple of the cases that I've worked of late have been Muslim communities. And I think about a case I did last year in the Eastern Cape, and it was a white family. And in that case, I stayed in the house with the family for the duration of that case. And it was them. I mean, they locked themselves up, and they were focused in resolving this crisis. And whether that be good or bad in terms of the consultant, I mean, that's incredibly stressful, because 24/7 you're with this family, and it's highly charged environment. But the point I want to make is when you then compare that to Muslim families, I've worked cases with both Pakistani and Indian families recently, and those families, when these kind of events happen, there's 40 people at the house. Everybody's there to show support. I mean, how it is. Everybody's there. It's a OPSEC nightmare. But I think the challenge is that when you kidnap, the perception out there is when you kidnap a Muslim, you have your resources in terms of receiving funds is 40 people. When you kidnap a white person, perhaps it's that small family. So that creates a problem, because those communities just tend to stand together, and these guys know it. They leverage of that. They'll tell you, go talk to the community, get more money from the community. So that sort of contributes, I think, to that.
Which is why we never want people to go on to when these things become public and there's media attention. It's like some good intending person says, we're going to start a GoFundMe to get the money, and we're like, no. Because what you're saying is you're going to open up the taps, and the person will be kept for longer. So what people don't understand is a lot of strategy. And why do we just pay the money? And there's so much behind the science of how these things work that lay people just don't get it. And we're not going to get into that, because we're not going to give tips.
Oh, come on, one or two.
Just mess things up in terms of the negotiation. It's very delicate.
Yeah. May I jump in and ask about now the perpetrators here, and what we're seeing, kind of trends here that you kind of maybe are picking up, or just from your observations? There's this sense that South Africa has become kind of an international playground for criminal organizations and for crime. Is this South Africa, are you finding that these are South African groups? And, it's a double-edged sword, because often you'll go like, there's that xenophobic aspect where it's like, all crime is being committed by foreigners. But we know South Africans are committing a lot of crime as well. Who are responsible here? Is this big international criminal syndicates? Is it kind of small South African groups that are centralized in particular geographies, or?
Look, Gerard will pitch in here too, but definitely there's a strong Mozambique element to the cases that I've seen, certainly. But also, I mean, going as far as the Middle East. quite a strong foreign influence. Definitely in the cases that we see in Durban and in the Eastern Cape as well. But local as well. The last case I remember, I said to you, Gerard, I spoke briefly with is he a colonel or Brigadier Luis Fernandez at the Hawks?
He was
he's
a
the
colonel.
best.
I don't know if Fernando's made a brigadier, but he was definitely a colonel. I haven't chatted with him. To a great guy. I haven't chatted him for a while.
One of our best.
So,
Just a shout out to Fernando, to Mr. Luis.
Yeah.
What a legend.
Yeah. So I remember him saying that, up that side, in the Eastern Cape now, you have exactly like Gerard said, cash in transit. So you had these cash in transit syndicates, and they've just gone, mate, there's so much less risk and there's more money in kidnaps, and they've just transitioned over from cash in transit. But the challenge you have then is you have these violent criminals. They are not accustomed to the kidnap-for-ransom,
Which is a slow game,
sort of playbook.
typically.
They don't know how to negotiate. I did a case where we strongly believe that was sort of the elements involved, and the negotiations were challenging because it was a process where we almost had to educate them in how this works. They kind of went, they kind of made a demand, and we said, well, we without going into the case detail too much, but we kind of went, well, look, we need to talk to our guy, and they would go get the money, and you would talk to your guy, and we sort of stood firm and said, that's not how it works. Before we even talk money, let's talk to our guy. And then they would drop the call, and then an hour later they would phone back, and our guy would be on the line. And it was a constant process of having to educate them on how this works. But that's really what you have. You have these groups that realize that, listen, this is a hell of a lot less risk. There's a lot of money. So yeah, but to get back to your question, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see quite a bit of Mozambican influence. We've had, in a recent case, a suspect from Zimbabwe who we believed were involved in that case. So yeah, it's definitely sort of foreign influence.
Yeah. And I've always said that I'd much rather be kidnapped by professionals and kept for longer than kidnapped by these idiots who think they're going to out for the first time, because they're the guys who don't know what to do. More likely, they might just decide at the end of it when they get their money, let's just kill this guy because it's easier, safer for us. The professionals know that this is an ongoing business. So you bugger up your reputation, you're killing hostages after you give some money. Nobody's going to pay you any money. And just coming back to your question also about, is it locals? So even with the big internationally inspired or driven cases where you have to understand that you would have locals who are the snatchers of the victim, the actual kidnapping of the victim. They typically would hand the victim over to the group that's going to look after the person for the next week, month, couple of months. And the person you're talking to is someone who's maybe sitting in Pakistan. So you have, different people. Even if you are by some miracle trace the call, that's not where your victim is. So it's really, it's these guys are using technology that the police can't crack, and people are always like, well, we'll just trace the phone. You don't understand how these guys are operating. You're not going to trace that phone. It's not it's just, so it's multi-leveled. So even with the international groups, it's local guys. And if you grab the one group, they have no idea who the other ones are. So you're not taking down the organization. And that's why we think it's some of these guys who are playing the local role that just thinking, well, I can do this. I've done the dangerous part, which is grabbing him and looking after, and then the other one's looking after him. We're going to do this ourselves and try and make a buck out of it.
I mean, you're not making me feel very optimistic about, us being able to pursue steps to tackle this problem.
Yeah. And I think taking down these organizations, no, the local chances, it's a much better chance that you'll catch those guys, that's sort of the amateurs, because they will not have the setup and the technology necessarily and make mistakes that if you have good cops that they can actually, catch them during or after. But also there's unfortunately some rumors that, like Vincent said, of, people in government or in the police involved. There was even you must understand, SAPS has police negotiators, those are the talkers. And then you have like a kidnap investigation groups, which seem to be popping up. And there's been some concerns about the investigation groups actually being somehow inappropriately involved. I think one guy was even arrested for trying to extort the family who was part of the investigation group. So there's, and my experience is that those investigation groups don't involve the negotiators of SAPS. So there's a lot of things that need to be redone. And
So for everyone watching, this is just another thing to add to the list that Profiler provides of things to have anxiety about and not feel too optimistic about entirely.
And I just want to say part of that is that I know quite a few of the SAPS negotiators, and I've worked happily hand in hand as a private consultant with some of these guys, and there are some brilliant negotiators in SAPS, without a doubt. As I said, I was trained many years ago by SAPS. And I would happily work with a SAPS negotiator who's got his head out of his ass, who I know I'm happily will work with them. And in that long case I had of 5 months, it was 2 SAPS negotiators, myself and my colleague Bronwyn, and we worked fantastically. I worked with Colonel McIntosh, but I've known him for ages.
It's encouraging. We can say they're definitely not in it for the money, the $400.
Yeah. Look, and Gerard, these days, the negotiators, do they all fall under the DPCI? Under the Hawks?
No. So negotiation is a secondary function. So you'll have a guy who could be a logistics who was accepted and trained as a negotiator, or a detective who was trained as a negotiator. So it's kind of like they select people who are interested, and you can be anywhere. You can be a uniform guy, you can be a flying squad guy, detective, you can be whatever. But you get selected, you put yourself forward, you get selected, you get trained, and it's a secondary role to whatever your normal day job is. I think the kidnap investigators, I think they might probably all be based somehow, somewhere within the DPCI. But like I said, we've had cases where, they haven't even informed the negotiators that there's a kidnapping going on. But the investigators still seem not this multidisciplinary approach. They seem to think, negotiators, who are you? What are you for? We're going to catch the guys to investigate. So there's a lot of disjointedness that's taking place.
Yeah. Also, so the last couple of cases in the Eastern Cape, particularly, I've worked. There's been DPCI negotiators involved, and the feeling I get is that it's very similar to SAPS, where you'd walk into a detective's office in a detective branch, and there's a stack of dockets like this, and these guys. From what I understand, there aren't many of them that are dedicated negotiators for the Hawks. And also, again, what I will say is, and this is sensitive. These generally are fairly good guys. They're decent guys, and they're fairly easy to work with. But there's always the concern of parallel initiatives. Because the negotiator doesn't work. So for us, in terms of private consultants, we work, independently in terms of our objectives and goals. And I don't know if it's the same with SAPS, but I know in my experience with the Hawks guys that I've worked with, they, like you say, it's not just a negotiator. There's an investigative element, and the negotiator doesn't make decisions independent of the investigative element. So the families are always aware that whatever is decided or discussed in a crisis meeting in terms of negotiations in front of a Hawks or a SAPS negotiator will be relayed to an investigative team, and there's every potential that critical piece of information will then be used to formulate, whatever type of tactical response. And that's the concern. That's why families are very, sort of skeptical in terms of involving, these agencies, because, there is that risk.
If I might, Major, just the private side of this world that you're a part of. When I often think that if you want to see where the brain drain from SAPS is going, what's happening to some of these amazing cops and former professionals from SAPS who have if you just hop on a flight around Africa, and you'll see a couple of guys sitting at the back of the plane who are up to, I don't know, Nigeria to do some security consulting, and that's where they are.
Wearing cargo pants and
exactly.
A baseball cap, and it's the typical outfit of people
jersey.
In this world.
Exactly. Is that the case? Are we finding that a lot of the expertise we're losing from SAPS is kind of finding its way into your world?
So look, most of the cases that I work with are from a global response perspective. I don't, Gerard has sort of contact with some of the local guys. Most, all of the consultants that I work with are guys that are globally placed, but certainly, I mean, all of them are, former military, former law enforcement, FBI, often special, sort of task force at training guys, so highly trained, highly experienced. Definitely, I think probably, I mean, I can only imagine that the scene locally is very similar, Gerard, and that, the experienced guys are the guys that end up at the agencies locally.
I'd see, obviously, we're coming up to the end of our time, but I want to circle back to your DRC case to round it off. How did that eventually conclude? Was everybody released safely? Can you say whether it was paid, etc.?
And what's up with the coffee?
Yeah, so when you're in a country like the DRC and you've had some difficult times, a cup of coffee is magic, right? And this plunger, this press crapped on the flight on the way there. We piked it up and ensured that we had a decent cup of coffee. And look, I'm about.
So this is first class when you're doing your thing in the DRC.
Yeah. I mean, the one on the left there is a protein shake. So I tend to avoid dodge on some of these places. So I live off these things, and that case. I mean, we had, it was challenging. I said to you, the demands, they weren't only substantive demands. At some stage we had a 2-week delay where there was no communication because, and we initially thought that was sort of tactical silence as these guys use. But it ended up being one of their own guys were caught with a cell phone in their compound. And on that phone, there were photos of the hostages and of their compound, and they ended up killing him. And they then had to hold a traditional burial for this guy. So they kill him and then have to honor him through a traditional burial, which then took 2 weeks to complete. So, I mean, those kind of things. We had intermediaries, third-party intermediaries, TPIs in that case, and TPIs, always complicate things because, and especially in areas like those, because they have, questionable motives and intentions. And it's always difficult. I mean, talking about TPIs, I worked a case in Nigeria last year where a radical group kidnapped some NGO members, and they moved them down to Chad. And in that case, they only work through intermediaries, and it was literally, they don't talk on the phone. You have to send this intermediary there. It would take, it was a female, it would take her 2 days to get there. She spends 2 days there talking to them, 2 days getting back to you, and that's one line of communication. Then we do it all over again. So, but I mean, TPRs can be really challenging. So in this case, we had a local priest that was working the case for us in an intermediate as an intermediary. It was a challenging case. It was a really good one. It was a good outcome. The way we work is we would rotate. So we rotate on a 3 to 4 week basis. We're in country for 4 weeks, rotate out and rotate back in, because of the pressure around these cases. And with a consult with our work, it's usually you there 24/7. So there's constant pressure there. So I just rotated out on my second rotation, probably 2 days after that, and they released our hostages. So I wasn't there in country for the release of my first case. There was a ransom paid. I can't disclose the amounts. And there were concessions reached in that agreement too. So yeah, it was an incredible case, very challenging. I've been back to the DRC after that, some good cases after that too. So that was a really good one.
For our Pan-African and international viewers, maybe just some advice. What are some of the countries around the continent where you would need to be on your toes when it comes to these kinds of things, or just need to have a certain degree of awareness? And what are the things, what's your advice to people just to kind of, to should this happen, what are the essential first steps? What should everyone know?
Yeah. So I mean, I think Nigeria is I mean, it'll always remain sort of an epicenter in terms of the African landscape. In terms of my own experience, I hold a multiple entry visa for Nigeria because we have cases there sort of frequently, and we need to get deployed and in country quite quickly. So, but there's many other African countries. I wouldn't want to single Nigeria out.
Sure.
But I mean, in terms of avoidance, again, I mean, I've said, as we've said, in cases, in a case, the second DRC case, we had an engineer leave the compound without the correct approvals and authority, and go out on a project. So, I think a lot of the times these things are common sense. Avoiding these type of events is about common sense, about basic situational awareness and personal security awareness. But in many cases, I mean, as we've said, these are targeted events. But yeah, it's about being aware, about trusting your instincts and applying common sense when it comes to situational awareness.
And
in terms of,
like, if you go to any country, I mean, if I go to New York, I'm going to ask people, like, is it safe to walk around in this area or with my phone in my hand? So I mean, it's almost like the basic security steps, not just to prevent becoming a victim of kidnapping, but just to prevent becoming a victim of anything, is probably what you should know. Yeah.
No, like I always say to people who have concerns about Joburg, it's like, if you're going to go wander around Hillbrow at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday night, then, you're asking for trouble. But otherwise, just got to kind of have your wits about you. Just, you find yourself embroiled in this as a family member, etc. You get that phone call. Like, what do? I mean, you talk about the fact that often folks will delay getting the likes of yourself involved. What's the first thing you should do? Make a phone call for help.
Yeah, I mean, so first thing is, you mean on the phone call from the hostage takers?
Yeah. So it's now happened. What is you're the family member. How do you respond immediately?
Yeah. So the first thing is, obviously, and this is before you're able to then mobilize whatever support resources you're going to get on board. But the first thing is to understand that the guys that you're talking to are the guys that you need to be talking to. Do they have your family member? So proof of possession. Is he alive? Proof of life. So those are really the first things, is understand his condition. Is he well? Are you even talking to the right people? Because you'd find in some cases you'd have groups that piggyback on more senior and more professional groups. They'll become aware of a high profile case and they'll try and cash in. So understand that he's okay, your loved one's okay. Understand that these are the people that you need to be talking to, and then really it's about understanding what it is they want without making any concessions. So, there should never be any sort of concession on that first phone call. And that's really the challenge for us often, is when we get in country, or when we get on site and family members have already made some sort of promise or something of the like. So that's really the objectives, is understanding that we're talking to the right people. We need to understand that this person, our loved one, is okay, he's alive and he's okay. And then we need to understand what is it that they want. We need to show them that we want to work with them. We want to get our loved one back. We want to humanize him. We want to use the human element, talk about him. And then, but we don't want to make concessions. Generally, and there's so many reasons. Often when we do these things, the person that communicates will think that they can say the wrong thing, or they have to be perfect in their delivery. And I mean, the DRC was challenging, but sometimes the more challenging cases is when you work with difficult communicators, because yes, if you don't deliver them the script correctly, it does become a problem. But these guys know that they're dealing with an extremely distressed family member. So, you can tell them, listen, I need to go and talk to my family. This is so far, above what I can handle right now. Give me time, phone me back, let me go and talk to, let me go talk to the people inside our family. We need to work this out. And these guys know that. They know that this family member will be under extreme stress. But the objectives will be to get that first, that indication that your loved one is okay, to let them know that you do want to work with them. You want to get them what they want. You want your loved one back. But importantly, to make no concessions whatsoever during that first phone call, so that we can then put together a strategy and understand how we need to move forward.
Well,
then your first phone call should be to someone like Vincent.
Yes.
Or, for example, TSU has a very dedicated professional negotiators, accepts negotiators, but people who are experts in K&R cases, not just your buddy who's a private investigator. You need to contact proper experts to set the tone for how this is going to go forward.
Well, I won't say I'm not a little bit disappointed that we're not talking about a criminal mastermind getting you to run from phone booth to phone booth on a time limit. I mean, I was kind of hoping there would be a bit of that, but
Listen,
not the case.
In our last case, we when we did the drop, the guys they made them drive around for 6 hours. They left at 10 o'clock that night, told them to drive in a direction as they reach. And that's what they'll do. As you reach a certain waypoint, they'll say, the next turn off, you turn right. And you'll go this way for 100 kilometers. And that's the other thing. So they will have these days, in the olden days, they used to have counter surveillance vehicles. So they would follow the vehicle that's doing the drop, and they would understand what's going on. These days, they have informers at sec points. So they would know. They would know if there's a vehicle following. So if there's someone, with a drone up in the air, and that drone is following the money, and there's a vehicle with an operator for that drone 15 kilometers behind. If he comes past that same waypoint and he's going past its next waypoint as well, and the next one, they'll identify that follow vehicle. So, but yeah, in that case, they drove them around for 6 hours till they eventually made the drop. So no, they do that. They send them around.
Okay, well,
yeah. So
thanks, Vincent. Thanks, Vincent. Well, folks, it's been an awesome opportunity to talk to you about what it is that you do and to get a better understanding. Unfortunately, to our viewers out there, because we're not live, we couldn't have anyone posing any questions to you, which is always fun. Hopefully, we can have an opportunity to do that in the future. And we can't really say to people that these kinds of issues are being dealt with on a macro level. I think we can be confident there are some great experts involved that if you know the right people to call, will help out. And hopefully we've given you some pointers to help get you to the point that should you find yourself in this situation, you got a sense of what to do and who the right kinds of people to speak to are. Gerard, final comment.
No, I mean, thanks. That's really great. And I mean, I know a lot of people, perhaps this one hand good, we don't know the viewers asking questions, because I think there will be a lot of things we can't answer, because I think people would like to know the. So I think this is perhaps one episode where it's a better one that was recorded, pre-recorded beforehand. But thanks, Vincent. I mean, this has really been great. It was exactly what I was hoping. I liked the conversation that we followed a case throughout, but also delved into side issues. And and thank you for your time as always.
Yeah,
yes,
thanks for plugging me on.
Yes, and hopefully we'll be able to call on you in the future to discuss these kinds of incidents as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much then, gentlemen. We're just going to say goodnight, folks, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Profiler Africa. It's been wonderful joining you as always. I mean, I think that's about it. So the only thing to do, as always, is just to remind people that the most important thing you can do, folks, is trust absolutely nobody. Just trust no one, okay? It's as simple as that.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember,